morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you, Julie. That's one of my absolute favorites. I have to be honest, that song always makes me mushy. So deserve a gold star. I'm holding it together. It's been a mushy kind of week. Have you ever had a moment where you didn't feel like dancing, where you just couldn't see the point, the purpose? You didn't have the drive? Life was just not giving you those vibes? I think those are the moments that's most important. In those moments when we don't know what else to do, why not dance, right? So let's just take a deep breath. Allow ourselves to rest into that feeling. That feeling when we remember what's truly important, what really matters. You know, we're in the middle of Lent. I believe we're in the third week. And I've been following the Lenten book. I don't know if anyone else has it. And it has been such a powerful journey they're taking us on through the eyes of Jesus, going into the Garden of Gethsemane. And can you imagine how he must have been feeling? This profound moment in his life with intense struggle, captured by all these human thoughts, and yet he had a divine journey ahead of him. This takes place in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he faces ultimate test, his divine calling. Ooh, can you imagine feeling that that's your calling, knowing what was ahead, that you had to keep going in that direction? This morning, every morning I ask Alexa what the affirmation is for the day. She's a good friend if you let her be. And she said, the affirmation for today is, I have the power to change my story. And I thought, yes, I love that. And it goes so well with this talk today. And yet, Jesus didn't really have the choice, right? He even pushed back, he resisted. Like, come on, do I really have to do this? But then in the next sentence, of course, he said, okay, or thy will be done. So he was willing to follow that calling. So I'm curious how this relates to our own journey. Have you ever felt like something was yours to do, but you didn't want to? I don't know about you, but that inner child still lives well and alive in me. I don't want to. Or that teenager that says, you're not the boss of me. Come on, it's in you too. We've all had those feelings, right? And often I think this journey, this calling, isn't clear because we're busy looking for it to look like something like Mother Teresa or, Martin Luther King Jr., these big, incredible examples, right? And yet we don't have to take up these large topics in the same way. We can do so even in the smallest, most gentle of ways. For me personally, one of the biggest ones I thought that I want to fix, but I can't, is addiction, when a dear loved one became wrapped up in that. And I went through all of the process of trying to fix, heal, tell, do all those things, right? I know the answer. I can fix them. I can love them so well. I can make them do different. And if anybody else ever have that moment where you learn that you can't, it's not yours to do. We can demonstrate, we can hold in prayer, we can love, but we can't do it for anybody else. And then one day, just maybe a year before COVID, I met someone who told me about her volunteer role, which I then took on and have been doing since, as a volunteer cuddler. She cuddles babies in the NICU, brand new little bitty babies, born addicted to drugs. That cuddling, though, is physical therapy for them. I've been doing it ever since the year before COVID. And I'll tell you what, it's not just physical therapy for them, it's mental, emotional, all the therapy for me, right? So if the calling was to contribute something to the healing, is that not doing exactly that? Absolutely. It just so often shows up different than maybe what we think it should look like. Or often life shows up differently than what I thought it should look like. we really need to stop shooting on ourselves. It doesn't usually work out well, right? But also, when we think it should look this way, we might miss when it looks this way, which could be even greater. I'd like to read to you a little bit out of the booklet. Now, I tell you, if ever you don't have the hard copies of the fabulous booklets that Unity prepares and sends out, you can download them for free on the internet, which is what I did and printed out this page. So I'm just going to read to you a little bit from it. It says, Jesus honored his calling. One of the reasons people sometimes hesitate to ask for divine guidance is because they fear what they might be called to do. It could overturn their comfortable lives. Yet many of us have stories of first resisting an idea that turned out to be exactly right for our spiritual path. As we explore the story of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night of his arrest, we hear him asking for guidance. And this is from Matthew 26:39. He says, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." In the first part of the prayer, Jesus expressed reluctance by asking whether this was really his to do. It was an understandable human response to an unthinkable situation. Maybe he wouldn't have to go through with what he saw was coming. Yet in the same sentence, he immediately released any doubts or questioning and moved into surrender. Yet not what I want, but what you want. In Matthew, Jesus repeated this prayer 3 times. In Luke's version, Jesus was also distraught that his sweat became like giant drops of blood falling on the ground. An angel appeared to him in that scripture to give him strength. There's a whole nother page, and that book is really wonderful. If you haven't looked at it, I highly encourage you to read the thoughts each day. Think about that angel to give him strength. Angels show up in many different ways. Strength's the power of the month for March, and it's one that I think we often misperceive. We think strength is no fear, it's tough, and yet strength sometimes is being afraid and doing it anyway. We heard a little bit about that, didn't we, in the song? What a beautiful thing. Even in those moments, I hope you dance. But this garden of Gethsemane is not just a physical location. It's not just a place long ago. It's actually that inner space within you, that place within you where we confront our fears, where we see our doubts, question them, move through them, that place where we get to debate sometimes or weigh or accept our purpose and our calling. There's nothing wrong with fear. You know, I've always felt like fear got a pretty bad rap. But fear serves a purpose. It says don't cross the street before looking both ways. It doesn't say don't cross the street. It just says be cautious, be aware. Fear helps us to be conscious of our surroundings, to look at different options. It's just data. I work for a chemical company and surrounded by scientists and, different chemists, and they think very analytically. I'm the woo-woo one in the building, let me tell you, by far. And when you look at that, though, it's good to collect the data, and that's really what fear is meant to do. It says, hey, you're going out in the woods. There may be a bear. Do you know what to do if that happens? It doesn't say stay indoors and never go outside. Right? And Jesus, in all of his humanity, and that's the beautiful thing about the stories of Jesus. It gives us something to relate to. Because the allness of God is hard to conceive with our human minds. It's hard to really grasp all of that. But Jesus gave us this bridge, if you will. And he felt the fear. I mean, he even prayed about it. He's like, really? Do I really have to do this? He was in touch with his inner child and teenager too. Really? Maybe he didn't say it that way, but I imagine he probably felt that way, right? And he felt that. He turned within. But then he immediately was willing and turned over to that desire to surrender. He spoke it, he felt it, he listened for the answer, and he moved forward. For me, that's that still small voice. And it gives us guidance, but it also gives us that place from which we can align ourselves with that divine Christ within us, which is within all of us. And again, if you just go in, that moment of surrender. For Jesus, he said, do I have to? And if I do have to, okay. I say yes to this divine purpose. So What have you been called here to do? Who have you been called to be? Charles Fillmore taught us that man is not just this physical body. You know, he said man is not a physical body with a soul, but a soul with a physical body. We are all expressions of this, of God's divine potential. Not just Jesus. We have all of that potential and power within us right here. And Jesus' struggles actually reminds us that even the most awakened souls, because, of course, I mean, he set the bar high, right? We may not quite be there yet in our consciousness, even though we have all that power within us. But he showed us that even the most enlightened face human challenges. I mean, would you be like, yippee hooray, if you were told you had to go be crucified? No way. Of course, he said, are you sure? Do I have to? I mean, he was having a human experience, right? But the Christ within always guides us towards our highest good. And sometimes it says don't go in the direction you thought you wanted to go in. Or it says that that's not yours to do. But it shows you another way. For me, when I don't like something that's going on in the world or the way somebody's behaving or some situation, I take it into prayer and ask, what is mine to do? But if I go in with an agenda, and we've all had those moments. I remember there being a point when my kids were teenagers where I thought I knew what should be happening. And I prayed, and I was praying for surrender. Okay, God. And you ever have those moments, even though God is within and everywhere present, where you're praying to the outside God and trying to bargain? I found myself bargaining. Okay, I surrender, I release, I put my son into your hands. And then I literally, in my car driving by myself with the windows up, heard myself out loud go, but if you would just consider this. and I too laughed because I'm like, April, that's not what surrender looks like. You're just saying it's up to you. But if you could just do it my way, that would be really awesome, right? And this purpose, this calling, this surrender, again, isn't always about these giant things. We don't have to cure hunger, although if you know how, please do. There's statistically enough food in the world on this planet to feed everybody. But which brings us back to that point where we can't change another person. We can only do what is ours to do. We can only shift ourselves, right? So it's been over 12 years ago since I was at Unity Village the first time. And I met Gary and Jane Simons. And Gary teaches The Eye of the Storm, which some of you may be familiar with. It's phenomenal. But Jane wrote this book with a couple other people called Who Have You Come Here to Be? And it's this beautifully illustrated book with gorgeous pictures. But the neat thing is on each page, it gives you something that may be just a glimpse into who you've come here to be. And the interesting thing about this book is it doesn't say a humanitarian. It doesn't say that you're going to cure cancer. It doesn't say that you're going to fix homelessness. None of that. Some of the things in this book are, for example, I have come here to be radiant. Every child born into this world is a new thought of God and every fresh and radiant possibility. Well, that feels possible. I have come here to be stretched. All illusions of smallness fade away now. In my mind, I see the infinity of me. In my heart, I feel the infinity of me. I was born to stretch and to feel so good. I have come here to be determined. We must remember that one determined person can make a significant difference, and that a small group of determined people can change the course of history. Each one, I've come here to be loved. I've come here to be open, to be compassionate, to be in awe. I've come here to be quiet. I've come here to be mystical. So as we release these maybe misdirected thoughts of what we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to live up to, we can step into and awaken what we've truly come here to be. Maybe you've come here to be love. Maybe you've come here to feed people. We all know that person, right? That is their ministry. Each one of us has come here with a gift. Maybe you're a good listener. Or maybe people just feel safe with you. As I mentioned, I work in a chemical company, and I'm an executive assistant. I work in the human resources department. And I have one of the scientists come to me often to talk. And about a year ago, she said, you're like having a life coach at work. I'm like, that's awesome. Totally not what they pay me for, but that's awesome. And the truth is, whatever you have come here to be, you will be wherever you go if you allow it. And yet often we push that down. We hide our light because we don't want to seem too bright, or we don't want to do it where it doesn't belong. I'll tell you, woo-woo doesn't really fit in a chemical company, right? And yet it's exactly what's needed. And so I don't hide my light. I'm exactly who I am everywhere I go, like it or not. So, and not everybody does. And I just want you to hear this loud and clear. That's okay. It's okay if not everybody appreciates your light. So this question, who have you come here to be? It's really not just about what you do. It's about who you're becoming. And that becoming happens every single day. Who have you come here to be? It's about uncovering this unique expression of God, this gift, this love that you are meant to embody. And as I get to know people, I can see that in them. I see that so clearly. You've come here to be a gift of music. You've come here to be so many different things. But that whatever it is you've been called to shows up in all of those different activities in your life. But the thing is, fear often holds us back, right? Either we're afraid of what people think, throw that out the window. We should be past that by age 20. Come on. What other people think is about them, not about us. Eric Butterworth, I'll share this quote with you. He said, "Fear is faith in reverse. When we focus on fear, we give it power. But when we focus on faith, we tap into the limitless power of the divine." Fear is faith in reverse. You know, what I think of with fear is when I'm in fear, I have forgotten my faith. Not completely, but when we look at this, we may forget that this is right here. If I'm looking at the window, I may forget there's a door open and waiting for me to walk through it. And that's why we need this tribe. We need each other to remind each other, to lift each other up, to refresh our memory of truth. Deepak Chopra said that healing is a return to memory of wholeness. Healing is a return to memory of wholeness. We just need to remember. And I believe we're all called to remind each other. And of course, we can't do it for everybody, because there may be one or two, maybe even 3 people in the world you'll run across that you don't remember it for them. You may be like, where's the Christ in that behavior? Or, oh my goodness, parents of teenagers have those moments. It's like, did I teach you nothing? Like, I know I've been teaching you stuff. Were you listening all these years, right? You see the faces of parents who have teenagers. And mine are in their 30s, and I still remember really clear, right? So in those moments, that's where our tribe comes in and reminds us and helps us to be able to remind them, right? We're all in this together. It's interesting. I picked this topic a long time ago, over a month or 2 ago, I think. And I did so based on what was in the Lenten book for this week. Usually I just, whatever comes to my mind, like that's the answer, and then I figure out why in prayer or meditation. But this time I was using Lenten book. And yet I didn't know at the time, but as it turns out this past week, 2 weeks ago I had to create a creative presentation on my calling for a class I'm in. So I wrote a poem and created a pretty picture thing. But then last week, during our progress interviews for ministerial school, because we're almost halfway through it, we had to give a 5 to 7 minute talk on our calling, and we had to tie it to a scripture. And then we had to answer a whole bunch of really random interview questions. And when I first heard about this, I was a little bit nervous. And I share this with you because maybe you too feel a little bit like I do about your calling. And I'll tell you, like I told them, I've never thought I've had a calling. I've heard all the, which is like, hello, you're in ministerial school. But truth be told, I thought and reviewed my life and prayed and meditated. I've heard all these stories of people who are like, this moment in time, I knew what I was meant to do. No, I can't think of that moment. I scanned and scrolled, and what was really interesting is that homework assignment we were given in my last class. We were given 7 scriptures, all from the Hebrew scriptures, which can be a little bit doom and gloomish. much of the Old Testament is a little bit darker than the New Testament, and I wasn't a fan of the 7 that we were given, but it was a homework assignment, and I followed the rules, and I wanted the credit, right? So as I read through them a little bit deeper, I came across the story of Jeremiah's calling, and it really gave me the answer that I had been missing. So Jeremiah was told, before you were born, I called you. And he's like, but I'm too young. And I mean, he did push back at God. He's like, yeah, this is yours to do. He's like, I don't have the words. And God told me, I'm going to give you the words. And when I thought about that, I thought, oh, I've had lots of those moments throughout my life. I've just never called it a calling. There have been times where I'm like, I'm too young. At 17, I had my son and got married and buried my dad. I was too young. And yet, I stepped into adulthood, parenthood, marriage, right? It was what I was to do next. The power of strength that we're focusing on this month has served me so well, all of the powers, of course, but that one has showed up so many times in my life long before I knew unity. Because in those moments, I've been using affirmations and denials my whole life. I've been visualizing what I hope is next, which we know is a tool. We may have just not known what we were doing before we learned these tools, but most of us have been doing it all along. We've been affirming. For me, I've always listened to that still small voice, and I'll tell you, in the times I didn't, in hindsight, I knew I should have. Like, oh man, I knew I was supposed to do that instead of this. Okay, lesson learned. Fun thing about those moments, lessons, you get to repeat them if you don't pay attention the first time. Now my prayer is that I don't have to repeat any lessons I don't enjoy. If only we learned that really early on. And yet I can look throughout my life, and my mid-20s, I walked into the first Unity church I ever knew about, and it was like home. And in less than a month, I decided to volunteer for the youth ministry. Now, sometimes callings come in really humorous ways. The very first day in the youth ministry with me and one other teacher, I was in the preschool room with 4-year-olds. We had 35 4-year-olds. That's enough to scare anybody in their right mind away. But I stayed. Maybe I wasn't in my right mind now that I worded it that way. But I stayed, and I did it for 13 years, and I loved it, and it was phenomenal. And you never could have told me I would have been willing to do that. I had 2 little kids at home. Why in the world would I want to go hang out with 35 more, right? And yet it fed me and it guided me. And I started taking these classes, not because I knew it was leading anywhere, but because I was interested, I was intrigued. You ever see something where you're like, I don't even know why I want to go to that, but I do. Do it. Because there's a reason you're being called. And then a few years later, or several years later, the person keeping track of our credits said, you're about 2 classes away from becoming a licensed Unity teacher. And my literal reaction was, that's cool. What does that mean? I've never heard of it before. What does that even mean? Which led me to Unity Village more than 12 years ago now. And, keep going. I became the, director of youth and family ministry at Unity of Royal Oak, and speaking and officiating weddings, and everybody kept saying that you're going to be a minister and you should go to ministerial school. I'm like, why? I'm doing all the things I could. What's the purpose? Who's got time for that? I work a full-time job and 3 part-time jobs, and I'm a parent. And, like, for what? And yet, I even had serious discussions with a few leaders I respect and asked their view. Is there something I could do different if I do this? And they're like, nope. Okay, but why then? Martha Creek was one, actually. I know you guys have her coming in virtually. And she's like, sweetie, no, you're doing it already. I'm like, well, so my mentor said there's no purpose, no point. And yet I literally woke up one day out of my sleep, and that's what I felt I was supposed to do. And in that moment, like Jeremiah, or like the inner teenager said, really? But why? For what? And I heard a resounding yes. Okay, I guess that's what we're doing. And when we're called to something, it may not make sense, or you may not feel like you have enough time. That's one of the biggest things I hear every year. I do a Goal Getters workshop, and I ask people what they think the biggest obstacle is that's standing in between them and where they want to be. What is the biggest obstacle in that gap? And almost everybody says, I don't have time. There's not enough time. But I'll tell you what, if your loved one suddenly had tickets to a vacation to take you on, or your tire was flat, Would you find time to go with that person on vacation or to go get your tire fixed? Because you don't have time for that either. We make time for whatever is ours to do. And if you're being called, the time and the space and the way will be made. And again, that calling looks like so many different things. So many different things. Just like Jesus surrendered in the garden, we too can embrace our divine yes. And sometimes it looks different. I never even knew there was something called a volunteer cuddler. Who wouldn't want to do that, right? I also volunteer in hospice. I do Reiki with hospice patients, and I laugh because I'm like, the newborn and the end of life, love it. It's the in-between folks that can be challenging, right? Those are the ones that are a little bit harder to work with at times. And yet, right where we are, we're being called. And maybe it's with people or animals or the environment. We're all called in so many different ways. So I want to ask you again, who have you come here to be? Is there a word that comes to your mind? Is there activity? If there's not, I want you to go in and just ask yourself, what brings me pure joy? What puts a smile on my face? Martha Creek would ask, what makes your tail wag? And that always, it brings me to a level of energy that I'm like, ooh, I know what makes my tail wag. What is that for you? And are you giving it space in your life? Are you allowing it time? Are you allowing it to take place? Are you allowing it to be expressed? Because if you're not, are you willing to accept the calling today? Just to think of one way that you can do that. Maybe it's joining a choir. Maybe that's scary. Go to karaoke. Actually, I find karaoke much more scary than choirs. But whatever it is, maybe it's just calling somebody that's living that calling that you know and asking them what got them started. Can you join in? This calling might be scary. Certainly it was for Jesus. Which brings me to reading you the second part of this story, not the whole thing. I just want to read you this one little part from the Lent message for today. Jesus knew that under the oppressive Roman regime occupying Judea, his teachings seemed radical and were easily misunderstood. While his primary teaching was to love one another, it was interpreted by the authorities as rabble-rousing or blasphemy. Despite the danger, Jesus a few days earlier had ridden into Jerusalem on a donkey with his followers shouting Hosanna and waving palm fronds. At the same time, on the other side of town, the Judea governor, Pontius Pilate, was entering Jerusalem in a military procession with pageantry fit for an empire whose leader called himself the Son of God. Those are those moments where I think many of us would go, okay, no, with all that going on, what must I look like? I don't want to be hated. And for us, hopefully, it wouldn't lead to the same outcome as Jesus, but it can feel that way sometimes. When people, anybody ever have a family member that thinks you joined a cult when you found unity? Many of us have, or like, oh, what is that woo-woo stuff? I grew up Catholic, and I have friends that have come to talk to me when their children were maybe being a little bit too woo-woo, and they wanted me to help them understand, which I think is really brave and courageous of them. But I find it funny that I'm now that person that can explain the weirdness their children may be doing. I don't think it's weird at all, quite frankly. But that calling may be scary, and you may have outer reasons to want to hide your light. I mean, turn on the news. The world can be a scary place if we choose to view it that way. And yet, at the same time that is going on, it's the same time as Pontius Pilate was coming in with all these bells and whistles trying to intimidate and show who was in power, there's also other stuff going on. It's all included. A dear friend at work, her and her husband had just found out they were pregnant. The same week her grandma was put into hospice. And she told me she was feeling really guilty and thought about not telling her family yet because she thought it was inappropriate to share. Well, they were grieving her grandma approaching the end of her life. And we've all been there, whether it be out of fear because there's some overpowering reason we may not feel safe sharing our light, or because we thought maybe someone else couldn't handle it. They were in grief, or actually just with our progress interviews that we had on this past week, a very dear friend of mine, her outcome wasn't what she had hoped for, and she was pretty upset. And mine was over the moon exciting. It made a really hard, rough week for work feel fantastic at the end. I felt, oh, just so good. And I too felt like, gosh, this is one of my best friends. I'm not sure I should share because she's really mad right now. In those moments, it's not ours to hide our light. Because when we let it shine, we remind other people that it still exists. Even when there's something to be afraid of, even when somebody is grieving or feeling that the world is unjust. Even when the world is unjust, there are an abundance of prosperity and blessings and goodness in the world at the same time. And so when we're overwhelmed, when we feel like we can't breathe in the midst of it, go in and ask yourself, who have I come here to be? In that space, you may be the light that someone else needs. You may be the hope. You may be that reminder that while this is going on, so is this. My coworker did share with her family, and they celebrated, and her grandma told her that she was so grateful to have learned that news while she was still here. What if she had held that back? What a gift it was for her grandmother to hear that. And I know sometimes it takes real deep courage. We have to be brave, but above all, we have to trust the process. So not only who have you come here to be, but I want to ask you, where is your faith? Because very often our faith is in our fears rather than in God. And if we believe all the stuff that we say we believe, then let's ground our feet in that knowing. And know that even despite appearances, we can close our eyes and go within and remember the truth that right here God is always. Myrtle Fillmore emphasized the importance of affirmative prayer, speaking words of faith. So I want you to join me in affirming this. I am guided by divine wisdom. I am guided by divine wisdom. I am courageous in fulfilling my purpose. I am courageous in fulfilling my purpose. May we all have the courage and the support to answer our call. We don't have to do it alone. In fact, I don't believe we're meant to do it alone. As we go into this week, when we ask ourselves, who have I come here to be? May we each be willing to hear the answer. And if we don't know how, ask for guidance. Or ask for someone that we trust to show us the way. Because if God is moving in and through and as each and every one of us, then it might be your friend, it might be your neighbor who opens that door. It might be that person that tells you about this program where you get to cuddle babies. Right? Or it might be someone that says, I know someone who's in need of exactly what you're asking about. Or you may just share something, a simple hello in the line at the grocery store, and given hope to the person who didn't know the next step, who couldn't see beyond the darkness. It shows up in many ways. You just have to be willing. So as we go into this week ahead, give yourself permission to ask yourself, what if? What if I was brave? What if I knew for sure that what I think might be my calling, what I think might be who I've come here to be, what if I see clearly that there is a place for me and for my light to shine? Because as we're willing, it will be shown, and a way will be made. And so it is. So taking that in, just take a deep breath. Give yourself permission to celebrate whatever it is that makes your tail wag. Give yourself permission to love the light that you are. Give yourself permission to be guided, to be in wonder, to be like a child who says, ooh, I wonder what great adventure will be next. Because that part of your inner child is welcome here as well. So as we prepare for meditation, Allow yourself to take a deep collective breath. Close your eyes if you're comfortable. And just allow yourself to relax into the space where you are, knowing that just as that seat or where you're sitting at home is fully supporting you, so is spirit. Fully supporting your mind, your body, your emotions, your soul. And release any tension that your shoulders, your neck, your jaw may be holding. And then give yourself permission to release any thoughts of worry or agenda or rush or to-dos. Release everything you can, and then with your next breath, release the rest. Imagine yourself now walking into a beautiful, serene garden. We've stepped into spring. This is your garden, a sacred space within you. Allow yourself to feel the sun on your face. Feel the soft, cool earth beneath your feet. Breathe in the fragrant air, the smell of flowers, the essence of peace and tranquility that is all around you in this garden. In this garden, right where you are safe. This is a sacred space and you are loved. Right here, you are connected to the divine presence within you. As you feel the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze, you feel that quiet stillness fill your mind, your thoughts, your heart. It surrounds you. And imagine walking deeper into this garden. You come into a quiet, secluded area, a place of stillness. This is your personal garden. A place where you can connect to your most inner spirit. That place of pure light. Imagine that Christ's light within you illuminating your heart. It becomes radiant, shining in every direction. Feel the gentle, loving presence of the divine guiding you. Hearing the quiet whisper of your soul asking, who have you come here to be? You take a moment to listen, and when the answer arises, you welcome it. Perhaps it's an image or a feeling or a word. Whatever it is, just trust the wisdom of your heart. And as you hear these affirmations, just welcome them in as your truth. I am guided by divine wisdom. I am courageous in fulfilling my purpose. I release all fear and doubt. I am here to express my divine potential. I say yes to my divine calling. Feel the power of these words resonating within you, uplifting you. Allow them to fill you with strength and courage and clarity. Now imagine yourself taking a step forward, embracing your divine yes. Feeling the peace within and the joy that comes from aligning with God's will. And know that you are supported and you are loved. Take a couple more deep breaths, feeling that peace and serenity in your inner garden. As we slowly get ready to bring our awareness back to this present moment, we carry this sense of peace and clarity throughout our day. knowing that we are always guided and supported in the journey that is ours to take, becoming more of who we are meant to be in every moment. I see you, and your light is radiant. As we begin to wiggle our toes and move our fingers, we slowly open up our eyes, and we just express thanks and gratitude for who we are and who we see in one another.